Well, so many people's livelihoods have been affected by this COVID crisis, of course, and as there's no telling when the crisis will die down completely, it stands to reason that many will be looking for work during the crisis. Joining us now to talk a little more about that is Jessica Goyer, the owner of Profilia. She's also been giving online seminars about job hunting at Concordia. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
First question, I guess, what is the first thing to do if you're looking for work? A lot of people, have trouble getting started.
Yeah. So, a lot of people were not expecting to be looking for work right now, right? And some were and have had to put their job process on pause. But the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you know your objective. You know who you're speaking to, right? And you know your audience. You know what they're looking for as a candidate, and therefore you can make sure that your content in both your resume, cover letter, and also your LinkedIn profile is properly speaking to them.
Mm-hmm. And what about networking? In this age of social distancing, this is something I was thinking about. How do you even approach networking right now?
Yeah, so networking is actually a major part of job hunting because you can find a lot of jobs that are not necessarily on the open job market through that, right? LinkedIn is a fantastic platform for networking, both with your existing network, assuming that you've properly been building that throughout the years, but also with people who are not necessarily in your network right now, but who are interesting to you because of the jobs, for example, that you're looking for, or the industry that you want to transition. So definitely networking is a huge part of the process, and that can still be done easily without, in-person contact. Obviously, like we're doing now through webcam, through phone calls. The good old school phone call still works quite well. So definitely networking is an important part of your job search.
It's almost maybe someone would appreciate it as a novelty, getting a phone call. It would help you stand out, maybe. Any tips particular to the video interview, right? This is a completely different monster.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the video interview is a tricky thing because it can reveal a lot of things about you. The first thing is your preparedness, right? Actually, a lot of recruiters now have not necessarily stopped interviewing throughout the COVID pandemic, and they've just transitioned the way they do it. So now doing it through webcam, and these interviews sometimes can be quite lengthy, right? Allows them not only to evaluate how well prepared you were, not only in terms of your content and how you have researched the company and the position, but also have you dressed for the position, right? You need to make sure that you come to the interview the same way that you would have come if you were physically going to meet an employer.
Mm-hmm. And what about, is there anything related to body language that is notable in any way, that is significant?
Yeah, so the first thing, of course, is that, I was actually speaking recently to one of our recruiting partners, and one of the things she's mentioned is that they're not necessarily losing a lot of things from the webcam versus in person in terms of the body language, because you can still evaluate a lot of things. But you want to make sure that, that you're smiling, that you're well dressed, and that you're also focused, because some of these interviews can last quite a long time. So you need to make sure that you maintain your focus. And of course, make sure that nobody in your house is going to be bothering you during this time, because we all know that working from home, you may have kids, dogs, whatever. You need to make sure that all of these things are not necessarily part of it.
This is something that I always found difficult. How do you frame a cover letter? And more particularly, how honest should you be in a cover letter? How formal should you be? What should you do to stand out in that cover letter? Does it even matter?
That's a really good question. There's different schools of thought on the cover letter, but what I've always said is that you better have one and it not be used than the opposite, right? So the difference between the letter and the resume is that the letter is made to contextualize your application, right? So who are you speaking to? What position are you applying for? And what makes you stand out? So absolutely, you need to have one. You can be very creative in there. It depends on your industry, right? I always come back to know your why, right? If you know who you're speaking to and you work in a very formal industry, perhaps it needs to be a bit more formal than a creative industry, for example, right? But definitely, best to have one and it not be read than the employer be expecting one and it's not be there.
All right. Good tips in an important time. Jessica Goyer, thank you so much for talking to us about it tonight.
Of course. Thanks for having me.